Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 2021 Bratislava Conference on Earth System Governance. My name is Jonathan Pickering. I'm a member of the Scientific Steering Committee of the Earth System Governance Project, and I'll be chairing the plenary today. I'm speaking from Canberra, Australia, and it's customary here to begin events with an acknowledgement of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who have lived on and cared for this country for tens of thousands of years. So I'd like to start by acknowledging the Ngunnawal people, the traditional owners of the land on which I'm speaking, and to pay my respects to their elders past and present. You may recall that last year's conference was postponed for obvious reasons to the onset of COVID, and we decided to hold a virtual forum on a somewhat smaller scale. And we were really impressed with how many people were able to join virtually from across the world. But we're excited that we can finally return to our annual conference this year. And we're pleased that we can hold the conference both online, given the travel limitations that many of us continue to face, but also that we could include an in-person component in Bratislava. And speaking as I am from a city in lockdown on the other side of the world, I'm still getting over my shattered dreams of sailing down the Danube to the conference venue, but I think it will be a great event no matter where you're participating from. And at this point, I'd like to say a huge thanks to the organising team in Bratislava for hosting this year's event, along with the team from the Earth System Governance Project's International Project Office in Utrecht, who have pulled out all the stops to get the conference up and running. So in today's opening plenary, we've got a great lineup to begin the conference discussions. We'll begin with a formal welcome by the conference chair, Tatiana Kluvankova, and next, James Patterson from the Scientific Steering Committee will give an overview of the Earth System Governance Project. Following that comes the centrepiece of the plenary, which is a keynote by Professor Karen O'Brien from the University of Oslo, which I'm really looking forward to, and I'm sure many of you are too. We then have the much anticipated announcement of the Yong Prize for the best conference paper authored by an early career researcher, and we'll conclude with a virtual toast by the conference chair. So in a moment, I'll hand over to Tatiana to give the formal welcome to the conference, but first let me briefly introduce her. So Tatiana is an ecological, institutional and behavioural economist whose work focuses on transdisciplinary collaboration between natural and social sciences. She's chair of Slovak Globe, which is a joint initiative of the Slovak Academy of Sciences and the Slovak University of Technology. And Slovak Globe focuses on interdisciplinary research on management of global change. And she's led numerous EU-funded major research projects in this area. She's a member of the board of the International Society for Ecological Economics, and she's also a lead faculty member of the Earth System Governance Project and the Bratislava ESG Research Centre. So she has the distinguished role of being the chair for the 2021 Bratislava conference, and on a personal note, it's been a great pleasure working with Tatiana to put the conference together. So, over to you, Tatiana.
Thank you very much, Jonathan. Hello, I'm Tatiana Kluvankova. I'm the conference chair. Good morning to Europe and this room. Very early good morning to America and good evening to Asia Pacific. We appreciate very much you all can be here. So you expect me to open this conference? I will. Targeted at 3 points. At first, topic of this conference has been set up sometimes early 2019, as we felt that Earth is approaching sort of tipping point to which Earth system governance has to react. Then COVID-19 has emerged and speeded up global turbulence, making our title highly actual. At second, there is a symbolic aspect of the conference. that for the first time happened in the part of European Union that recently experienced massive political and economic transformation. So yesterday we went to Pečna forest. That is the site some of you might experience on a virtual platform or website. This historically geopolitical crossroads today determine competing interests and illustrates how military defense and political violence resulted in preservation of original riparian forest almost in the city center. Earth system governance is also facing a crossroad, and geopolitics is affecting research direction for climate or biodiversity governance that is aiming to societal transformation, requiring behavioral responses. Final point from my opening, pandemic restrictions affect our mobility. Thus, over the next 3 days, we offer 3 dimensions of the program. There are 2 plenaries, 6 semi-plenaries, and 1 science policy forum with more than 20 speakers, some of them on site present here. Then there are 2 innovative and 9 parallel session slots, networking space and task for day with new emerging Earth system governance topic. This all in virtual form. On-site and virtual, and finally, there is on-site and virtual social program with opportunities to experience Slovak culture, history, and food. This has been designed by early stage research group that have made tremendous efforts to make on-site and virtual part of the program equal as much as possible, and at the same time fun. Finally, welcome at 2021 Earth System Governance in Turbulent Times. First hybrid conference. I trust next one is again in person. Good luck to presenters and enjoy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Tatiana, for the welcome to the conference. I'd now like to introduce James Patterson, who will give a brief overview of the Earth System Governance Network and a welcome on behalf of the Scientific Steering Committee. So many of you will be familiar with the project already, but quite a few of you may be new to it. This may be the first time you've been to an Earth System Governance project. So this is a good chance to get an overview of how the network works. So James is an assistant professor at Utrecht University, and he is the current co-chair of the Earth System Governance Project's Scientific Steering Committee. And his work focuses on transformations in governance systems, especially the institutional and policy dynamics of these processes. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Jonathan, and thank you very much, Tatiana, for welcoming us to this conference. So on behalf of the Scientific Steering Committee of the Earth System Governance Project, we would like to extend our very warm welcome to this 2021 Bratislava Conference on Earth System Governance. I'm sure that we will experience the wonderful hospitality of our host city throughout the conference, and certainly get the feeling of being together in spirit in Bratislava. I would like to take this moment to give a brief overview of the Earth System Governance Project to explain what it involves, how it operates, and the many ways in which you can be involved. Next slide, please. The Earth System Governance Project is an international research alliance focusing on the governance dimensions of global environmental change and transformation. It is a large and long-standing community. It is also highly dynamic, collaborative, and always open to new ideas and initiatives of its members. It has a long history and has been operating for well over a decade, and it is currently in its second 10-year phase, which began in 2019. Next slide, please. A science and implementation plan guides the activities of the network. This plan was developed collaboratively with scholars across all continents and career levels over a 3-year period, and you can find this plan easily on the website. At the center is a framework that articulates key governance challenges in sustainability in order to help structure debates, broker dialogue between us, and most of all, to drive a shared project to understand and improve the governance of sustainability across all scales from local to global. It also supports a wide variety of approaches to research, ranging from empirical analytical research to normative and critical research, and even through to more transformative and visionary research. Next slide, please. The network is made up of many different facets. This includes around 400 research fellows and lead faculty across all career stages, comprising a highly interdisciplinary community of scholars. If you're not already a research fellow, you should know that it is straightforward to become one by sending your CV and a brief motivation statement to the International Project Office. So you can contact the office if you have further questions about that. There are also 16 research centers based at leading institutions across the globe. There are task forces and working groups focusing on specific issues of shared interest. And there's almost too many different topics to name that are going on at the moment. So you can look on the website and find out more. And you can also join in many different meetings that are happening on the final day of the conference with task forces and working groups. There are also multiple publication outlets, including book series with MIT Press and Cambridge University Press, a working paper series, and a journal. And more information about all these things can be found on the website. Next slide, please. And of course, there are the annual global conferences. This 2021 Bratislava conference stands in a long lineage of global conferences, stretching back to 2007. These events have a global reach, reflecting the diversity of both research activities and also, crucially, the diversity of scholars involved across all continents. As the first Earth System Governance Conference in Central Europe, we are delighted to be hosted this year by our colleagues in Bratislava. Next slide, please. Overall, the Scientific Steering Committee is responsible for guiding the activities of the Earth System Governance Project. The current Scientific Steering Committee began in 2019 with the second 10-year phase of the project and comprises scholars from across a variety of continents and disciplines. The Scientific Steering Committee members will be present throughout the conference, and we do hope that you'll feel very welcome to reach out anytime to these folks during the conference. Next slide, please. So in closing, we look forward immensely to all the activities and discussions in the coming days. If this is your first time attending an Earth System Governance event, then we extend to you an especially warm welcome. For those who are already members of the Earth System Governance community, we hope that you enjoy reconnecting with both new and long-standing colleagues. Importantly, during the conference, please tweet using the hashtag ESG2021. We hope that this 2021 Bratislava conference on Earth System Governance can help in both understanding the many governance challenges of these turbulent times and in finding suitable responses to them. Thank you. Jonathan, I hand back to you.
Okay. Now it would be very pleasure for me to introduce our keynote speaker, who is Professor Karen O'Brien. I would like to invite her to join us here in the place. So I met Karen around the year of 2005, when sitting together also with Oran Yong and Lynn Ostrom on IHDP Science Committee, and discussing research direction of social and human dimensions of climate change and vulnerability. Also, with life situations in US and Europe by that times. Karen is a professor at the Department of Sociology and Human Geography, University of Oslo. Her research emphasizes various aspects of social change, such as the role of beliefs, values, world lives, creativity, collaboration, including exploitation of the potential of quantum of social change. She's also co-founder of Sea Change, which is a research and innovation company that supports collaborative research for transformation in a changing climate. Her achievements are numerous. I wish to point out that Karen was named by Web of Science as one of the world's most influential researchers of the past decade, with more than 33,000 citations in Google Scholars, and is holder of several awards. You may read more on the website in her bio. We are very much grateful she accepted invitation to be with us. Karen will be speaking on the topic of governing transformation to sustainability. It's about relationships. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Tatiana. And it's really an honor to be here today to give the keynote at the Earth System Governance Conference. And I have both the pleasure and the privilege of being here in Bratislava in person at the conference. And I would like to say hello to everybody who's online, but also to everyone who's in the room today. And it's a very, I must admit that I'm a little bit nervous because it's been 1.5 years since I've actually talked to anyone but my computer screen. So I'm nervous in a very good way. And in the next 30 minutes, I want to talk about not just governing transformations, but also transforming governance. How do we respond at the rate, the scale, and the speed and the depth that is called for at this time? I'm going to present some examples of the research that my group is doing. And I also want to walk you through a little bit of my own inquiry into this idea of, how do small changes make a big difference, or what I call quantum social change. Before I start, I would like to thank the organizers for their generous hospitality here. And I'd like to acknowledge the fantastic work that is being done by this community and recognize that, the theme of this year's conference on Earth system governance in turbulent times is really serious. And I want to just start with, looking at the situation we're at right now, where we're starting to see that, climate crises are all over the world. And we're actually failing to bend the curves on greenhouse gas emissions, and we're failing to reduce vulnerability and risk that we ourselves are producing. In other words, we are creating a situation of environmental catastrophe around the world. Combined with this, we see that we have a world of widening wealth gaps for more than 70% of the global population, which increases vulnerability and actually creates both real and perceived winners and losers when it comes to the outcomes and outputs of this. And so we are contributing to global injustice at the same time as environmental catastrophes. The degradation of environment and destruction of resources is also having an effect on both ecosystems and people, as we see in the COVID-19 pandemic. And so what we're experiencing is tremendous loss of both lives and livelihoods and ecosystems. And finally, we start to see that in terms of biodiversity conservation, we really are failing to actually meet any of the commitments that we have set out for us over the past decade. So our failure really is a question, what are we doing wrong? And what do we need to do differently to make things better? And that brings me to a question that I think many of you may have listening here today is like, what do we do now? Sometimes I feel just very small and overwhelmed by the scale of the global problems and thinking that, oh, what I do doesn't matter, what we do doesn't matter. And I think that that really calls for us to take the concept of transformation seriously. And I really want to talk about transformation, not as this blah, blah, blah transform, but to recognize that transformation is about deep changes in the way we do things and look at things. I think of transformation as significant physical and or qualitative changes in form, structure, and meaning making. And it's exemplified in the caterpillar's metamorphosis into a butterfly. And I think we can all relate to that, and we can think about transformations as this very beautiful thing, but it also involves that, that turbulence, the falling apart of things that we're used to, things that we really love. And transformations also include something that is much deeper for us, that is really about, we can get the next slide. The clicker is not clicking. Next slide. Yeah, thank you. Transformation is also the powerful unleashing of human potential to commit, care, and affect change for a better life. So there's something much deeper about the transformations that we're trying to unfold at this time in the midst of being transformed by all of the changes we see around us in the Earth system and the multiple crises that we're affecting. So this leaves us to this question of how do we go about transforming? And for this, I have been looking at what I call the 3 spheres of transformation, which really is the relationship between the practical, the political, and the personal spheres of transformation. The practical sphere often gets a lot of attention because it's really about the measurable results that we can see. It's the technical and the behavioral changes that we're really striving for in order to shift our society and meet the 169 Sustainable Development Goal targets and other plans. But we're not getting there, as I mentioned in the introduction. Often the political sphere is not aligned with the practical solutions that we need. And by the political sphere, I refer to the systems and the structures, the social and cultural norms, rules, regulations, institutions, infrastructures, basically how we organize society collectively in order to realize different outcomes. And we get stuck in this political sphere for decades, and we don't actually move systems in the direction that they need to go. And this is often because we're forgetting about the personal sphere. And by the personal sphere, I don't just mean individual sphere, but our shared beliefs, values, worldviews, and also the paradigms through which we see the systems, where we draw the boundaries around those systems, how we see leadership, how we see our own role in actually actualizing and generating change. And when we start to look at these 3 spheres of transformation, not as separate, but as integrated and simultaneous, we start to see that everything that we do is actually always in all 3 spheres. And this brings us to the Earth System Governance Project and its recognition that of our inability right now to actually govern our transformations. From the webpage, it says, it is apparent that the institutions, organizations, and governance mechanisms by which humans currently regulate their relationships with the natural environment and global biochemical systems are not only insufficient, they're also poorly understood. So it's not that we need research, but we also need action. And to actually move us in a direction, we may need to change the way we look at the system. And I think Max Planck was attributed as saying that until we start to see things differently, we see the same things. And other people have said, change the way you look at things and the things you look at will change. So I want to think about like, how can we frame the issue very differently, not just as environmental crises, but as relationship problems. And this brings me then to the question of relationships. And I want to talk about relationships. When I say this at home, my husband makes it like runs for the door because it's like, no, not relationships. But actually relationships is very simply defined as the way in which 2 or more people or things are connected, or the state of being connected. And so that is very much about what we're trying to talk about in terms of collectively organizing society to create a world where that is equitable and where all life can thrive. The way that we have actually approached relationship, especially from a Western perspective, is very much on a dualistic reductionist perspective, where we've almost like drawn a line. I draw a line between me and you, between us and other, between society and the environment, and between humans and nature. And this is not just a constructed line in the sand. It is a line that is like cognitively in our heads, how we relate to the world as separate, discrete, and individual beings that are separate, and nature is something out there that we need to fix or address or something. And I think that this is actually a considerable problem, and it's not the only worldview that is out there, and that's why I want to start to talk about relationships and relational problems. But from this view of us and other, and me and you, and these binaries, we start to really create fragmentation in society. We end up with a society that is fractured, that is fragmented, and it's characterized by very sharp and polarized monologues rather than deep and relational dialogues. And I think the governance landscape, especially today, is very fragmented, as Earth system governance research has shown. And it's not that we're not trying to actually make these connections and to show the relationships. And this is, the classical Brotherton diagram for Earth system science. And it shows that we're trying to make the connections, but as you'll see on the right side of the screen, human activities are just kind of an input into the system, and the impacts are an outcome of the system. And we are separate from the system. That doesn't include us as conscious agents of change. You can actually deliberately change the way we look at the world. So if we actually brought this diagram to life and entered it as if we are not just part of the system, we are the system, we would start to see a very different world. And this is a depiction of the Brotherton diagram by artist Tone Bjordam, who I'm collaborating with on a book that I will talk about later. And what we start to see is that this really is about life itself and our role in that life. And if we start to work from a relational paradigm, we'll start to actually not just see things differently, but see different results. Sometimes this works. Oops. Okay, great. So relational paradigms, and I'm talking about paradigms in terms of, like some of the most powerful, considered the most powerful leverage points for systems change. And a paradigm can be defined as a set of concepts, metaphors, and patterns of thought that underlie theories and methods of science. And it can also be very much described as a type or example or pattern or model of something. And so a paper that reviews over 100 articles on relational thinking by Zach Walsh and his colleagues shows that these relational paradigms are the ontologies, the epistemologies, and the ethics that do not presuppose this subject-object or nature-culture binary, these lines in the sand that I described earlier. And they create a tanglegram that shows, how all these different research ways of seeing things fit together. And I want to draw your attention to the blue circles, because I think the relational ontologies, the what is real for us, is what we need to question in these turbulent times. And there's a lot of rich research going on and ways of thinking about this that actually influences the way that we do research and the way that we show up ethically in society. So I want to bring to your attention, some of the interesting things that are coming out of process philosophy, new materialism that connects us with indigenous wisdom, religious wisdom, and speculative realism. Because I think that there is the edge that we have to actually explore if we want to get out of the situation that we're in. And this brings us to my research, a 5-year research project that is coming to an end now called Adaptation Connects. And in this project, we're not looking at just adapting to change itself, but we're looking at how do we adapt to the very idea that we can transform global systems. So it's adaptation as transformation. And the Connect stands for combining old and new knowledge to enable conscious transformations to sustainability. And as Tatiana mentioned in the introduction, we're looking at creativity, collaboration, empowerment, and also flexibility in terms of, these are the conditions that might be needed to actually actualize the type of changes that we need. And we do this through specific research projects called Art Connects, Coffee Connects, Travel Connects, and Education Connects. And I would like to just go through a few of the research results that kind of capture the relationality of the relational way of thinking in research. And these are articles that are published now published in a special feature of Sustainability Science on the how of transformation. And I present them because I think they're super interesting, and also ways of getting us to see how a relational thinking, what it looks like in practice, what it means for practice. And the first article I'd like to talk about is by Ermeline Graham Hansen, who looks at Indigenous leadership, and she organizes it around the interrelated analytical lenses of the individual leader, leadership through culture, leadership through process, and also leadership through integration. And she explores this in a Native Alaskan community that is engaged in transforming community systems towards enhanced sustainability. And she finds in her research that leadership that in the community can be seen as something that is simultaneously individual and collective. And she argues that an Indigenous relational ontology makes it possible to imagine leadership as an individual collective simultaneity. So whereas in Western thought, we're thinking of, very hierarchically as the leaders, we're waiting for the leaders to take responses and do something. In a relational perspective, we're all responsible and we all have the ability to respond both individually and collectively simultaneously. The next piece of research I want to talk about is by my PhD student, Gail Hochachka, who on finding shared meaning in the Anthropocene, engaging diverse perspectives on climate change. And here she's looking at the relationship between individuals and collectives and our shared meaning making given that we all think very different things about climate change. She explores an approach to shared meaning at the interface of individual and collective views about climate change. And she's doing this in a coffee growing community of Guatemala. She presents a conceptual framework that describes 5 psychological reasons why climate change challenges our individual and collective meaning making. For example, that it's abstract, distant, entangled in self and culture, contested in values, and also not salient. The framework informs her use of photo voice as a transformative action research method, and she examines its ability to overcome some of the meaning-making challenges between individuals and collectives in the coffee cooperative. I think what's really interesting about her work is she's looking at how people relate to different aspects of the global value chain for coffee. And her findings suggest that this psychosocial process to climate entanglements engages both the individuals and the collective subjectively and intersubjectively. So there are different ways of making meaning and about connecting meaning. We don't have to be in this polarized world. And I think that's a really important point to remember. But transformations from a relational perspective are also about how we relate to ourselves as much as to others. And Julia Bentz and her colleagues look at creative embodied practices and the potentialities for sustainability transformations. She's a postdoctoral researcher, and she's exploring an integrative approach to sustainability transformations that really connects the body and the mind and arts and science. And she carried out this research in Lisbon, Portugal, and is really concerned with integrating diverse forms of knowledge in an open, collaborative, and creative ways. And this type of research responds to the scholarship that is emphasizing the importance of connecting different ways of knowing and different ways of being, and science and art and embodied and local knowledges to better understand environmental change and to foster greater sense of community resilience and engagement. In their study, they found that some of the key elements for bringing out this potential really is the being felt through metaphors, through embedding the project in locally, and also the use of creative embodied practices. When we talk about wanting to, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. When we talk about embodying change, it links us to the concept of right relations. And in this article on decolonizing transformations through right relations, we're seeing how the embodied practices really are at the core of this concept of right relations. An Indigenous conceptualization of relationality is really looking at, to really decolonize ourselves from this binary that we've imposed on the world, and exploring how this relationality can form the foundation for transformations. And so they're looking at right relations as meaning an obligation to the to other humans, to other species, to the land, and also to the climate. 4 dimensions that are key to right relations are shown on these petals here, and that's being in action, listening deeply, self-reflexivity, and also creating those spaces for thinking and being differently. And this in turn then creates a very powerful manner of generating equitable and sustainable transformations. And on the outer petals, they've put some of the processes that they studied and found through their different research projects. And this finally brings me to a study on what matters and the importance of values in both research and action. And Milda Nordby-Rosenberg's PhD dissertation on the role of values in transformations towards sustainability, looking at a case study of coffee production in Burundi, looks at values in both research and practice. And she draws on Karen Barad's work and her idea of agential realism, the idea that we are not just interacting as separate individuals, but we are intra-acting as one larger system. And based on interviews and participatory observations, she looks at how values of togetherness, care, dignity, and faith were cultivated in relationships among coffee farmers, as well as a specialty coffee producer, and how they worked to reconfigure the socio-ecological relationships among coffee farmers, and including their land use practices. And Milda argues that we are inseparable from, and then hence we are co-productive of the material world. In other words, the experience that we have plays a vital role in transformative change. And together, I think these projects are showing us that relationships really do matter. How we see ourselves in the world, how we show up, how we do our research, and what our research means in practice and in politics and personally really does matter. This leads me to my own journey and inquiry into this idea of how do individuals actually influence change, and a question, are we underestimating our collective capacity for social change by taking a very reductionistic, deterministic, and atomistic view of ourselves in relation to the environment and the challenges of these turbulent times? And so this book, You Matter More Than You Think, Quantum Social Change for a Thriving World, has been a little bit of a journey and an experiment and an inquiry for me. I eventually came to define quantum social change as a conscious, nonlinear, and non-local approach to transformation that is grounded in our inherent oneness. It recognizes that we are entangled through language, meaning, and shared context, and that our deepest values and intentions are potential sources of individual change, collective change, and systems change. And just to give you a little background, I published this book last year. I made it the manuscript available in June, because in the time of COVID, I just thought, well, here, turbulent times where that I felt them, like I embodied them. And about 900 people downloaded the manuscript, and I got lots of feedback from people, lots of questions, and really great dialogues through a series of You Matter seminars. And through this, then the last year, I've been revising this. And asking myself these questions all along about what really matters. And the book is coming out next week. And what I want to really draw attention to is like one of the core elements, besides that paradigms matter, beliefs matters, but also that relationships matter. And the relationships that matter are not, we need to actually shift from a classical view of ourselves as separate, as these small little marbles, to thinking of ourselves as these waves of potential. And I think that how we relate to ourselves, how we relate to each other, to the environment, and also to the future, really creates the patterns that tend to repeat themselves in a very systemic manner. And we find ourselves repeating, whether it's in our research projects at our universities or jobs or whatever, but we find ourselves repeating the patterns of the past rather than realizing the potentials that are available every moment. So we are shaping both the social and material structures and enabling or constraining the kinds of change that we actually need to be able to achieve. And I also want to point to, whether regardless of what people think about like quantum, you put quantum with social and people think like, oh gosh, woo woo or something, but it also has really big implications. It is challenging our understanding about the nature of reality at the smallest scale. In quantum social science is saying that this actually matters at the macro scale of social engagement, not the least through the metaphors that we use. And metaphors matter because they are the concepts, they convey the images, the emotions, the values, the judgments, what we take to be true or false. And in Metaphors We Live By, George Lakoff and Mark Johnson argue that new metaphors have the power to create a new reality. And they explain that this occurs when we start to make sense of our everyday experiences in terms of a new metaphor, and especially when we begin to act differently and in accordance with the metaphor. So it becomes part of the world that we experience. And I think this is really important in terms of all the other relational paradigms that exist and are being practiced in everyday lives all over the world by people. So it comes into which narrative has the most power, which metaphors have the most power. And in a study of metaphors in climate change, some authors found that looking at like 63 documents, most of the metaphors that are used are very much based on binaries that lead to an outcome of cost-benefit analyses and things. And it is very much a black and white, us and other perception. So if we were to start to look at what does a quantum leap really mean in practice? What does superpositions? What does entanglement? And I want to point out that entanglement is not just a metaphor, but it is actually the underlying nature of reality. And it's kind of a mind-blowing thing because we tend to think, to understand not causality, this causing that, but correlation, that we are correlated and connected. I think that's a very compelling and interesting reason to say like, wow, how can we take our understanding of entanglement and take it one step further and just really start to think it's, we are entangled with all species, we are entangled with nature, we are nature. And Karen Barad puts this nicely. She says that boundaries, properties, and meanings are differentially enacted through our intra-activity of mattering. The very nature of materiality is an entanglement. And I take this to mean that we are actually mattering in the moment. And this means when we go back to these three spheres of transformations, it's not that we're trying to transform the world out there and going in there. And I see myself and many others are kind of saying, we need to change people's beliefs, values, and worldviews and paradigms, and almost putting that right into the practical sphere and turning people into like objects to be changed rather than allowing them to be the subjects of change in their own lives. And I think that that's a really important distinction that we as researchers are making, because we're almost, we're always trying to change others. And then we think, well, how do we think about the world? How do we show up in the world? And how do we act in the world? And when we start to erase those binaries and dualisms that we have, we start to, bring our transformations to life. And this is another depiction of the three spheres by Tone Bjordam. And I think it captures that eye of, just how do we see change differently becomes important. And this also has important implications for how we scale change and how we see our role in global processes and practices. For me, quantum social change shows that small changes can actually make a difference because the whole construction of scales, kind of dissolves as well. And when you start to think in terms of scaling change, and this is from Avit Bomik, Mark McCaffrey et al.'s Powers of 10 framework, translated into what I would call a fractal approach. We start to see that we, as the 10 to the 0 or P0, actually have an enormous influence at all scales, at all of our spheres of influence, through our language, through our meaning, through our intra-connections. And I think that in that way, we start to realize that we are always affecting all scales of change. And so our, the slide I showed you earlier of a little me, what am I going to do in this big, with these big problems? It's like, it's we, it's the powerful I, we perspective that is so predominant in so many cultures and is so overridden by the way we're looking at the world. And so I see here just a lot of unrealized and untapped potential for social change by changing the way that we look at ourselves in relation to the world. And I know that this is, okay, what does this mean in practice? And the thing that I always come up with is that practice matters. Mattering in the moment is really a practice of actually listening to others and actually relating in different ways to people. And it's something that we can take to our, whether it's our research group, whether it's our university system, whether it's our, the Earth system governance community, or whether it's the entire world. It actually does matter what we're saying. And I end the book with a lot of the questions that came up over the last year through the people who read it and said, wait a minute, I don't know if I agree with this. And so it really like confronting these questions. And I'm reminded, a quote by Albert Einstein says, don't listen to the person who has the answers, listen to the person who has the questions. And questions are so important as a way of opening up an inquiry and a space for others to actually change their minds rather than being like colonized with my solutions or your solutions, etc. And physicist David Bohm says, in scientific inquiries, a crucial step is to ask the right questions. And for me, this question of what do we do now, and are we underestimating our collective capacity for social change, are the questions that I want to pursue in the next years. So thank you very much for listening, and I'm happy to take questions because they're very important. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for a very nice talk. Now I would like all of you to think about the questions. You can pose the questions here directly in the room. If you raise your hand, we can bring a microphone, and we also have some questions already that arrive to the chat that we can read, and Karen, I think, will ask. So it's following Albert Einstein, it's very nice to ask questions. So floor is open for questions. So far, if there is time for you to think of your questions, I can read maybe some questions from the audience in online.
Yeah, sure.
So there is Lucas from the portal who is asking, the three spheres of transformation remind me of Donella. Sorry, a little technical problem. So again, the three spheres of transformation remind me of Donella Meadow's 12 leverage points to intervene in a system. Meadows includes a hierarchy of the power of her leverage points. Do you also think of the three spheres as being hierarchical in the sense that change at one sphere is more radical, powerful, transformative than the others?
That's an excellent question, and thank you for asking it, Lucas. Often when I present the three spheres, I overlay them on Donella Meadows' leverage points for systems change and show that the practical sphere really does refer to the numbers and the very low leverage points, and that the political sphere is much more, it's about the feedbacks and the rules of the system and the power to change the rules of the system. And the highest leverage point are the paradigms through which the whole system is created, including the values and things, and the power to transcend paradigms. So there is that kind of that recognition. I wouldn't call it necessarily hierarchical, but the power of personal or individual change and collective change in paradigms really does, as Meadows points out, affect all the other systems. So it's a really powerful entry point for that. And I also recognize that leverage points themselves are very mechanistic. It's like, oh, we've got to leverage change. And I think that when we're looking for the leverage points, we could actually think of ourselves as we are the leverage points for change. And so how do we actually show up in that different paradigm and actually affect those systems all around? So I definitely think that these they map very nicely onto the 12 leverage points, and there's a lot of power. And the reason I'm interested in the paradigms is because it's a powerful leverage point for change.
Okay, thank you very much. I also would like to remind that the participants on online version who indicated they would like to address questions directly will be given the right to address the question via video chat. But any questions here in the room? Yes, please. Yes, you have microphone. Wait a second, you will be given a microphone.
Thanks, Karen, so much. Can you specify a little bit that very interesting concept, intra-activity? How do you understand it and what to do with it? Thanks.
Yeah, intra-actions and intra-activity comes from Karen Barad's agential realism, where she's looking at agency as kind of a congealing, like that it's not something we have, it's something that we do. And she's recognizing that we're always making a cut between ourselves and others in that moment, and that we're not separate, we are through entanglement. We're intra-actions almost by definition says I'm separate from you and we are, intra-acting in this way. Intra-actions is mean we are one and we are together intra-acting. So how I show up does actually influence my relationship to the soil, to the land, to you and to others. So it's a little bit on that, like interstate and intrastate, that kind of level. But her bottom line in her agential realism is that, we are that entanglement is the nature of the universe.
Okay, thank you very much for a good question. So now we will again read some questions from online. So there is Katarina asking, studies also seem to suggest that there is no clear correlation between people's values, attitudes towards nature and their environmental footprints. When the footprints is tangibly measured, such as CO2, I wonder how you see this fit your view about the importance of relationships.
Yeah, thank you, Katarina. That's also a really great question, because I think that, we have these values and everything, and yet, greenhouse gas emissions keep going up. Our carbon footprints are enormous. And it's very easy to just think that that it's all just about reducing our carbon footprints. But as we know, we actually need to have the systems and the structures in place to facilitate mobility, to facilitate access to different diets, to different foods and things, different ways of growing and things. So there's that almost simultaneous intra-action between what I do and how we organize society. And I think that gap between the values and my footprints is almost an outcome of us feeling that we don't matter and feeling that, the little things I do aren't actually going to make a difference. And I know that many of us, I really, struggle to like, oh, how will I get to Bratislava from Oslo? And I looked into all the possibilities of taking trains and ferries and buses and things. And I think it was very, and then at the very end of the day, I just thought this doesn't actually work to spend 33 hours and 3 days traveling. And so it's that challenge is, I think, enormous. But when we start to see that it's both and, that we can actually work for reducing our carbon footprints and promoting systems change. And one way I do this is with my students and with the public through Sea Change is through these 30-day challenges where you get people to look at change as an object and get them to engage in an inquiry on how their little changes relate to conversations that they have with their neighbors, their bosses, their colleagues, and with the people who actually operate the cafeterias, who create the bike lanes, who do are scheduling trains and et cetera. And so I think that we again are we think we don't actually see ourselves as powerful players in systems change.
There is a question up in the room. Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Karen, for your interesting talk, and I completely share on the perspective of, or the notion of the opportunities that arise from looking at details and the knowledge which is already there. But what happens when there's an external need to really change, or if there are situations where you know that your decisions imply trade-offs for other people, like us traveling a lot, whereas others can't travel a lot. And if everybody would travel as much, the Earth system would collapse, right? So then you get to the situation where you have to require people to change, and then you have a different constellation in the social interactions, and this is where conflicts arise and where you get into problems. So I wondered, and it's also affecting the groups of society who were not part of the transformation debate, probably, who want to avoid taking accountability for those trajectories. So how would you suggest we can include them and confront maybe people with the uncomfortable need that they need to change their habits, which they might link to their own identity, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that your question, thank you for that, because I think that gets to kind of the essence of the challenge of this, because transformation, if it were easy, we would have transformed 20, 30 years ago, but we get these trade-offs, we get these black, like gray zones of what should I do? How should I, get there? What should I eat? And I think it is very personal, and like, is this actually, going to have a bigger impact than just my CO2 emissions, what I eat, how I move, how I do these things. But I think from this perspective, it's really about, how do we change these conflicts into conversations? How do we start to actually make it very, like to shift those conversations into questions? Because I think, to me, there's not a right or wrong answer. So, should you go visit your, sick mother in another country or not? And, how do you, what should you serve, eat? How should you be in this time of crisis? And I think that, our tendency is to want to tell people that they have to change their behaviors and things, but there also is like the collective way of organizing systems of, that, it's remarkable. We were also hopeful after COVID that like, oh, flying has gone down and things, but you would think, the price of airline tickets is also, ridiculously cheap right now for the, doesn't take in the externalities. And so how do we actually create those structural changes that support the behaviors that we all, we may want to change, but in different contexts we can't. So I would, I would love to just have a conversation about it, because I think those trade-offs are so, like they're real, they're there. And how do we actually take in the values that apply to the whole and think, okay, if I want to, think of equity and justice and compassion for myself and for others, how do what do I do right here and right now? So yeah, I'm going to leave that as a question that we have for all of us to take in our daily lives of how do you take into account people who actually have a very little responsibility for the problems, and we ourselves who have the ability to respond in a bigger way. And so I think, the idea that we need to solve, actually, create gigatons of change, not just, our own carbon footprint, but it's something that I struggle with a lot. So thank you.
Okay, now next question is very nicely connecting. It's coming from Owen. Following the quantum idea in behavior for environments, do you think that the ideas of quantum social change, Alexander Wendt, could be taken future in Earth system governance?
Thank you, Owen, for that question. And my work has been very much inspired by Alexander Wendt's quantum social theory, where he just, as someone who really was the, forefather of constructivism in international relations, about 10 years ago, probably more than 10 years ago, he started to challenge his own worldview and paradigm and saying, like, what if we're all, getting this wrong? And so I actually contacted him and I said, what does this mean for climate change? And he's very thoughtful. And he said, I think that it means that we are one quantum social organism. And that kind of let me, okay, let me look into that. And so I have been engaging with him. And what's been remarkable is that how much his ideas have been picked up in the international relations community in terms of looking whether it's, ontological agency and, there's a lot of really exciting work that is challenging a very realist perspective on international relations. And I think it's, it hasn't yet come to all of the social sciences, but there is an emerging field of quantum decision making and quantum game theory and quantum economics and all of these things that are just, presenting a new perspective that I think bridge very well to indigenous knowledge and wisdom traditions and things. So to me, it's an area that is really creates some exciting conversations. And James Derderian at University of Sydney organizes an annual Q Symposium that brings all sorts of different speakers together. And I think that it's really worth us thinking, what does this mean for Earth system science? What if we actually include the noosphere, the collective meaning making and our relationship to ecology in our Earth systems models? And I think that's really exciting, and it asks different questions and good questions that get back to exactly those things of what do I do? How do I matter? How do we manage a collective where there's trade-offs and where there are going to be serious loss. We are experiencing serious losses.
Okay, we take one more because we have quite many questions from online environment. So Maritela is asking, how do you promote transformation and allow the subjects of transformation to grow and develop in a context of very difficult situations such as deep poverty or war, where people is giving priority to survive?
Thank you, Maricela. Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. And that's one of the questions I address at the end of the book. It's like, why not just focus on the leaders? There's, people are very struggling. And a lot of this work is very much influenced by collaboration with Dr. Monica Sharma, who worked on transformational leadership within the UN system. And the idea that every person has that capacity to shift systems and structures, and that, regardless of where what your context is, and to recognize then that, there are these difficult situations and that we can always show up differently, but we need alliances with other people, with collectives. And I see many of the situations that are happening in the world today where, people are struggling to survive, but it's also that, that I am responsible for the current political economy. There's weapons sales from my own country. There's oil sales from my own country. So where can I intervene in that system to actually to be allies with them, and not to fix things, but to allow them to actually show up? And I think science writer John Horgan talks about humanity as matter that yearns to matter. And I see there's so many, whether you're talking about the civil disobedience movement in Myanmar, or people working to, survive in, flooding situations now in on the east coast of the US and things like that, that it starts to dissolve the boundaries between us and other in this, and we start to see that this is a collective effort, and that relational perspective, I think, can bring us into a like a different understanding of not putting people into the boxes of, oh, you're poor, but almost leveling out that playing field. And the work really aligns, I think, with Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, of not being the well-adapted individual who suits the oppressor's needs, but actually conscientization of recognizing that we are, like that, yeah, that we actually can challenge those structures and things. So.
Okay. Any questions in the room, please? Not yet, okay. Okay, now this is the one which is for all. Stefan is asking. Thanks for the great talk. The discipline that has arguably the most long-standing tradition in relational thinking is sociology, which has been focusing on social interactions, groups, organization, institutions. However, these do not seem to appear as such in the three spheres of transformation, except of perhaps being subsumed in the personal sphere.
Well, I think that like the sociology and, there's so many different ways of relating to change. And the three spheres really is a very simple, almost heuristic or framework that, social practice theory might, look at the relationship between the political and the practical spheres. And a lot of sociology is looking at the personal and the political. And we know that the personal is political and the political is personal and things. So it's not meant to actually replace or just say that this, it fits a lot of theories and different ways of seeing, but it's a way of just recognizing that that personal sphere does show up, including in how sociologists, think about theories of change and theories of transformation and socials and groups and things. And much of that really, like a lot of it is still based on, a separation between individuals and groups. And so my research is very interested in what is the relationship between individual change, collective change, and systems change. And sometimes, putting on a different pair of glasses is, very valuable to start to see that this. And I think one thing that I've discovered, and my son has a band and it's called The Eternal Page, which resonates with me. And his album is Echoes of Nothing New. And really is like what I find always in writing these things is like people have been saying these things for 100 years, and you find sociologists in 18, like the very earliest ones were saying this. And so it's like, how do we translate these ideas from other cultures, from other wisdom traditions into the arenas that we are active with as global change researchers? And that is, accessing a dominant paradigm and that has a lot of power, both economic and political and cultural power. So I think, this work is as much about translation and about opening up the conversations than it's not about like just kind of saying like, oh, this all has to fit in there. So I think that's a really, really good to just think about how we all relate to change itself.
Very much. And then we have a question from Karina. How has the experience of the COVID-19 pandemic, its politics and impacts changed? How do you think about transformation for sustainability?
Okay, thank you, Karina. I think that's a great question. I think all of us can have a good, dinner conversation about this, because I think that for me, living in Norway, I feel like we've lived a little bit in a bubble because there's a lot of trust in the government and everybody, locked down and kind of obeyed, and we were given like, rights and responsibilities and things. But as a US citizen, I was looking at what was going on in the United States and in many other countries, and you really had, polarization and this, don't change me, don't tell me what to do. And I think that the polarizing politics of COVID, which is such a serious and, like there's so much, the outcomes are so prevalent and clear and in our face, and we see the numbers adding up every day. It's so, at the same time working on climate change and biodiversity loss, environmental change, where we know what the outcomes are, and yet we're still in these polarized debates. And I think that in many ways it's you know, it's a call for us to actually change, you know, like for serious change. And so it's governing transformations, but also transforming governance. And again, it's not an easy, there's no easy answers, but there's many questions that I think need to be raised in that. And it's very easy to just say like, oh, who are those people? Who are these, you know, and look at that. And then you remember that like, oh, these are my relatives. These are my friends. These are us. And so it's just, you know, I think that it gives us food for thought and I think food for great discussions, a dinner conversation.
Okay, time is coming to the end, but we have time for maybe 2 more questions. If there is any questions from the room. Okay, then we pick up the questions from the online forum. So Annelia is asking, how does the idea of individual collective transformation relate to religious, spiritual ideas?
That's a great question too, because I think that there's a resonance between these ideas, and maybe that's why quantum has been picked up by like in New Age literatures of quantum healing, quantum everything. But I think that it's very important to recognize that that individual collective, it goes to many indigenous knowledge traditions, many wisdom traditions, but also a lot of like neurological sciences. Daniel Siegel, a neuroscientist, has a book on me plus we, that this is actually a way, and through meditative practices, we can get these different experiences. And people are talking about psychedelics as ways to, break down those barriers and things, and religious traditions, so you're starting to look at that subjective way of engaging with reality. And one reason that I really like the Alexander Wentz work and agential realism, because I think for all of us, we know that, we're dealing with a really real situation right here. Ice melts at certain temperatures, species disappear, and that we actually have a decade to respond, and we are in the decade that matters. And so how do we take these ideas and really use them to, in practice, in our research and in our policies and our practice.
Okay, thank you very much. There is a last question from online. So very symbolic then. Thank you very much for your very inspiring insights. I would be curious what you consider the most burning research questions we have to work on, asking a passionate junior researcher who struggles where best to start.
Wow. Okay. I would actually, the research that I presented from my research group, these are all young researchers, and I get so much inspiration because I would like to ask Eva, what is your burning question? Because I think those are the ones we really need to listen to. And, I'm always reminded when in my teaching, and I was like, we have to think outside the box. And a student maybe 15 years ago was like, Karen, we're not in the box, you are. And that really made me realize that, yeah, we're talking to generations that are growing up with a different worldview, with different perspectives, and in a global society where we have access to many knowledge traditions, many ways of doing this. So I would love to hear what the burning research questions that you have are, because I think that's that is the cutting edge. And yeah, so.
Okay, well, I'm afraid we run out of time, so we can continue, at least we here in the room, to asking burning questions after this session. I know that there are quite many questions on the list, but we may be able to find a way how to address it to current after. And I'd like to thank you very much for your interesting talk here, and hope that you enjoyed very much. And we have prepared very little present for Karen and for the other speakers on this conference, which are typical Slovak, I can say it's a toy. It's a symbol of the conference. And now be careful, I will demonstrate how it works. So this is the memory for you, for Slovakia and for this country and for the conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to have fun. Thank you.
Okay, now I pass the word to Jonathan, I think, or
Sure, yes, and thank you so much, Tatiana, and thank you very much as well, indeed, Karen, for an excellent keynote presentation, and made a compelling, very timely case for a relational understanding of transformations. And I think that speaks both to the conference theme and also to the substantial stream of work in ESG on transformations. Indeed, research communities such as ESG are themselves a set of relationships, and I suppose that prompts us to think ourselves about our role as a community in shaping transformations. We will continue these discussions throughout the conference, including many questions we've received from Karen's talk. Now, in the remaining time that we have a couple more important things to do. And the first of these is the Yong Prize for this year. And so to announce the prize for this year, I'm going to pass over to Rakim Kim, who's an assistant professor of global environmental governance at the Copernicus Institute of Sustainable Development at Utrecht University. He's been actively involved in the System Governance Project in a number of roles, and he is the chair of the Yong Prize Committee and also the inaugural winner of this award from 2013. So over to you, Rakim.
So thank you, Jonathan. So it is now time for the Yong Prize. My name is Rakim, and I'm the chair of the prize committee. Before I announce this year's winner, I'd like to say a few words about the prize. So the Yong Prize is a prize for early career scholars. It was set up in 2013 to reward and encourage groundbreaking research on Earth system governance. And the prize is also set up to honor the pioneering work of Professor Yong, who has had a tremendous impact on our research community. Next slide, please. So this year we have once again received a good number of quality submissions for the prize. These submissions have been evaluated by the prize committee consisting of 7 distinguished scholars and myself, all coming from a wide range of backgrounds. The committee members are, in alphabetical order, Professors Frank Bierman, Lorraine Elliott, Christopher Gordon, Peter Haas, Tatiana Klubankova, Kate O'Neill, and Susan Park. All submissions went through a 2-step partially blind review process, which allowed for a fair and transparent evaluation. Now it is time to announce the winner. The 2021 Yong Prize goes to, next slide please, Dr. Jasper Montana from the School of Geography and the Environment at Oxford for his paper titled Responsibilities for Biodiversity in the Anthropocene, Allocation, Enablement, and Relations of Responsibility in the UK Overseas Territories. The prize committee found the paper conceptually innovative, empirically solid, and theoretically relevant to the ESG literature. And now we will hear from Professor Yong about what he thought about Dr. Montana's work. Next slide, please.
A privilege and a pleasure to have this opportunity to offer a few comments on the paper that is the winner of the 8th Yong Prize. There's much to like about Jasper Montana's paper on responsibilities for biodiversity in the Anthropocene. He does an excellent job of working back and forth between in-depth case study and larger conceptual and theoretical issues of considerable importance. He digs deeply into efforts to conserve biodiversity in the UK overseas territories. He uses this case as a basis for exploring responsibility, what he calls relational understanding of responsibility. He gains leverage by fusing ideas from international relations and human geography. Along the way, he shows how thinking about narratives can help us to understand the complexities of this subject. let me offer a few observations that came to my mind in reading this stimulating paper. First, regarding the 6-element analytic framework Jasper sets up for understanding relations of responsibility. One thing that struck me when I looked at this framework is perhaps we need to think about responsibility not only for what, but also responsibility to whom. And also in looking at the analytic framework, I wondered about reasons for why actors behave responsibly. But then second, I thought about trends and dynamics. How do the contents and the influence of narratives shift over time? The rise and fall of different kinds of narratives. For example, are we witnessing today a shift toward a narrative which Jasper calls environmental stewardship in the context of the Anthropocene? The third, regarding the determinants, the explanations of shifts in narrative's responsibility. Does the rise of the idea of the Anthropocene shift our way of thinking about relational responsibility? Do we now think, because we have become aware or because we've become influenced by the idea of the Anthropocene, do we now think differently about narratives of responsibility than we did before we had this concept? And then fourth, regarding links between relational responsibility and the Earth system and Earth system governance, which is our special interest in the context of this conference. Do we now need to think of in global terms in addressing responsibility for the conservation of biodiversity? Jasper, of course, talks about relational responsibility in the context of the United Kingdom overseas territories, but we in the Earth system governance community are increasingly aware of global concerns and global issues. And when we think, for example, about the 6th great extinction event, we're thinking about global loss of biodiversity. And so I wonder in this context whether we as a species, human beings, have trouble accepting responsibility for our actions on a global scale or beyond the confines of our own communities or societies. We may be used to thinking about responsibility to our neighbors or responsibilities to our community or even to our country. But now in the Anthropocene, do we need to expand our scope? Do we need now to think about responsibility to the global community to address questions of Earth system governance? Anyway, those were a few thoughts that came to my mind in thinking about this very stimulating paper. Finally, I'd like just to make a comment on the conduct of research in the time of COVID. Jasper's study involves extensive interviews carried out to a large extent during the time of COVID. This obviously required considerable agility on the part of the researcher. And so I see this paper, in addition to being very interesting in terms of its substance, a really inspiring paper in terms of how younger generations of researchers are finding ways to continue to do important research, even under the difficult circumstances of COVID-19. And so my concluding remark is that my hat is off to Jasper, Montana for producing an impressive paper under challenging conditions.
Thank you, Professor Yong. It's always inspiring to hear from you. So on behalf of the prize committee, I would also like to add my congratulations to Dr. Montana on such an outstanding achievement. I have the plaque with me here, which I will make sure to have it posted to you. So this is the end of the prize ceremony, and I now hand back to Jonathan. Thank you.
Many thanks, Rick, and hats off indeed to Jasper for the prize for this year. Congratulations. And I'd like to add my thanks too to Oren Young for his laudation. He's done so much to inspire generations of researchers in the ESG community. And it struck me as well that the question of relational responsibility that Oren highlighted in his laudation also connects nicely with aspects of Karen's keynote. So the final segment of this opening plenary, we have a virtual toast from Tatiana. So over to you, Tatiana.
Okay, thank you very much. Opening session is coming to the end. And before we close, I like to very shortly introduce conference team that has over the last 2 years made enormous efforts to organize this event in highly motivated and collaborative mode. First, there is Gustav, Lisa, and Jane, who are representing Earth System Governance International Office. And then we have Ivana, who is our conference manager. Would you like to, yes, show please here down. To whom you may respond in all the organizational matters. She has made a great job to coordinate all the work. And then we have our colleagues from our center who are Stanka and Martin in this room, dedicated to the program implementation. Then is a group of PhD students and graduate students, Tomáš, Natalia, Betka, Dominik, Sasha, along with the group of volunteers that we have here in the room and who are helping us to make this conference really successful. And we have also Zuzka, our colleague, who is invisible member of the team. Then finally, I like to also highlight the role of Maciej, who is our conference platform manager, to whom we are grateful for all managing the virtual space. So this is the team that is going to be over this conference to support the conference and to help all the tasks to be implemented. So thank you very much. And now I like to finish this by saying a little bit about our host, who is the CETIP. It's the non-governmental organization who was established based on the advice and help of Linostrom in 2007. And now this organization is being also part of the Earth System Government Research Center Network. The most important mission that we are addressing is the behavior change to sustainability. And we have also some program in sessions in this conference that you may follow and to see what we are doing. And then second is Slovak Globe, that is joint research center between Slovak University of Technology, who is also hosting our venue here, and the Slovak Academy of Sciences. This is the research center for supporting the transformation to carbon neutral society. And that's for the host of this conference. And before we close, on the behalf of the conference organizing committee, I would like all of you to charge your glasses and join me in this special occasion and for the success of this conference. As of our distance, I'm pleased to offer you special toasts that can address all. Enjoy.
Oh, thank you so much, Tatiana, and thank you so much to the team as well for an amazing job putting the conference together. That's the sound of that instrument takes me all the way back to Oaxaca in 2019 when we first announced the Bratislava conference. So it is great to see it actually taking place. So that brings us to the end of our opening plenary. So I'd like to say a huge thanks to all of our speakers today, which and it's really, I think, set the scene for what promises to be an excellent few days at the conference. And so get involved in any and all of the sessions that you can across whichever time zones you're awake for. And make sure to stay tuned for some other great sessions during the day, including there is a Slovak folk dance workshop coming up in the break, followed by a round of innovative sessions and parallel sessions, capped off then by a science policy forum on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework. So thanks so much. I'm very much looking forward to discussions over the next few days and catching up with you during the sessions.